Well, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you joining us here this afternoon for our first of a three-part series on evidence-based practices. And some of you that are familiar with the Mid-America PTTC may actually recognize the guy by face and name. Dave Clausen was my predecessor here at the PTTC, and we've been looking forward to putting something together like this for quite some time now, and we're finally here. So hopefully you'll stay with us through all three sessions. We'll be back again a week from today, and then on September the 8th, we'll do the third and final installment. So mark your calendars for those. I'm Steve Miller with the Mid-America PTTC, and we are glad you're here. We always let everyone know that while we are funded by SAMHSA, they do not necessarily represent the views, the policies, or the positions that will be expressed in today's training. Next slide, please. So we are the Mid-America PTTC, and we're building the community by building capacity, and that's exactly what today's training is all about. And we are saying that collaboration is the key to effective substance misuse prevention. So we strive for something stronger than collaboration, the act of working with someone to produce or create something. We want community, a fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, values, and goals. At our core, we believe that prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. And I'm glad that Dave Clausen didn't lay copyright to that before he left, because it's a great tagline for us. The PTTC is housed at ACT, Missouri, and we've been serving at the grassroots level for 30 years now. Next slide. I think the most important one of all these things we do as a wraparound for any of our trainings is that the use of affirming language does inspire hope. And I do believe, and I believe Dave believes, that language matters and that words have power and people come first. The PTTC network uses affirming language to promote the application of evidence-based and culturally informed practices. Next slide. We've got a couple of events. I'll drop some links in the chat once I hand it over to Dave. But if you'd be interested in engaging in our Leadership Institute, we have our next installment happening on August the 18th. It's during the Central Time noon hour. So if you'd like to join us for that conversation, we'd love to have you in the audience. And then on August 24th is our next opportunity to have a DEC Connect, which is a community of practice with our friends at the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. And we'll kind of be doing an overview on their new DEC Academy 101, and they will soon be rolling out what's referred to as DEC Academy 201, the next level. So we want to connect people with that on August 24th if you're interested. And finally, the next slide, you can skip that one. I think everybody knows about Zoom by now. I don't hear you, Dave.
You can't hear me?
No.
Well, quick note on the closed captions. The bottom of your screen, your Zoom controls, you'll see the CC and it says live transcript. So if you would like to hide the closed captions, you can simply click that and it'll give you a little menu to hit hide closed captions or view closed captions. Okay, sorry. Back to you, Steve.
That's okay. Thanks, Dave. I'm going to show the next slide. You'll see this once again at the end of the training. This is what is referred to as the GIPRA. Anybody that's been in an audience for any of the TTCs knows that we like to collect post data around the event that we are hosting today. So we'll put this screen back up. You'll either be able to grab that QR code with your phone, or we'll put a link in the chat at the end of the training. So without further ado, let's go ahead and set this thing up. Dave Clausen is now, I don't know your exact title. You're the owner, emperor, king of DJC Solutions. But what's most important is that he's here today to talk to us about evidence-based practices.
All right, rock and roll. Thank you for that introduction. And yes, because that tagline "prevention is better together" is not trademarked, means I can still use it here on my slides as well.
I'm gonna get a
But
lawyer.
we are recording this. But yes, welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome. Good to see some familiar names. Feel free to use your cameras if and when you are comfortable doing so. Also, be asking you to come off of mute at various times throughout today's session, both in this large room and also in some small group breakouts as well. And yes, I can actually drop the slides in the chat box now if folks would like that. I know some folks like to write notes directly on slides. So let me do that right there. Now that'll be popping up in your chat box and you can download those slides now. And I can also get those to Steve so he can send them out later as well. So DJC Solutions, not just my initials, but basically it's a modern day consulting company, and we're really aimed at connecting those driven individuals and organizations to optimal performance, really taking our core teachings, our core learnings and principles, and help you connect them to your individual situation to help uplift you in that moment and empower you to pursue and achieve real change. We work with professionals, organizations, military veterans, and just individuals looking to take their lives and careers to that next level excellence. Some of the things we do would be customized training and technical assistance, individual and group coaching, group facilitation, got a podcast network, and online course creation, and a whole lot more as well. A little bit about myself for those new folks in the audience. I found my way to prevention by means of being a police officer at Eastern Illinois University. Didn't take me long as a college cop to realize the impact substance use and misuse would have on the way I did my job. And as I got out and started to engage folks on campus and in the community, and ended up actually joining the Campus Community Coalition, I heard about this thing called prevention science and evidence-based prevention. And it just dawned on me, it's like, gosh, I want to do more of that. Wouldn't it be great if folks didn't drink so much around here? Wouldn't that make life great? Then also coupling that with my own struggles with drinking and post-traumatic stress as a result of my combat deployment to Iraq, it really truly does. Prevention holds a near and dear part of my heart, a big part of it. And so the more we can do upstream in prevention to create safer, healthier, and happier communities, I am all in. Let's do this. And can't do it alone, because together we are stronger. So that's what a little bit about me and DJC Solutions. You can throw more in later if you would like. But here's what we're doing today. We're just going to do a nice little overview. What are evidence-based programs? Why in the world are they so desirable? Maybe you didn't think they're desirable, but I'm hoping after this session, you'll be like, oh my goodness, I love those EBPs. Talk a little bit about how and why they're effective, and of course, what we need to know before selecting them. And I got a few good resources. Y'all might be familiar with some of them. I saw somebody was from Wyoming, the Wyoming Prevention Depot. Good stuff going on out there as well. So that is what we've got in store for today. But y'all, prevention is better together. And you all are prevention leaders. And this is a community. We've come together as a community today to talk about prevention, to learn, to grow together. So I want to just offer you all a time to connect with each other too, really fostering and fueling that community, connection, and togetherness. So I want to just go into breakouts real quick and just share one thing that you love about living in your community. You can call it your neighborhood, your city, your state. You can define your community however you would like. But I want you to just share with your folks in the small breakout room one thing you love about living in your community. And when you all come back, Just going to open it up for folks to share some of those fun things that they like about their communities. All right. Any questions before we go? All right. So put you in there for 7 minutes with a 60-second countdown. You're looking at like 4 people. There's one group of 5. So that should give everybody plenty of time to share their fun little memory, fun thing they love about their community. See you back here in just a couple. Hey, Taylor.
Hey, Taylor. Glad you got in.
All right. Zach's connected audio. Taylor, Zach, we are in breakouts doing introductions because prevention is better together, and we're all about building community. I'm going to toss you into those breakouts real quick. They're answering one question, and that question is what you can see here on the slides. What's one thing you love about living in your community? And you can define community however you would like. All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. All right. And should be zooming them there now. This is the setup for focusing on environmental prevention strategies. Now, all right, welcome back, everyone. All right, I got to hear just from 2 to 3 folks who will share what's one thing that you love about your community, about living in your community. Just want to hear from a couple folks.
I'll go.
Who-
3 of us in our breakout room are from college towns. 2 of us live in Iowa City and 1 lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. So we talked about enjoying living in a community that's really like a vibrant mix of people, lots of talent, lots of smart folks around in a college community, and it makes it an exciting place to live.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Carrie. Now, Kelly, did I see you come off mute as well?
Yes, I just love the passion in my community. I live here in O'Neill, Nebraska, and it just seems like we all are very passionate about prevention and just keeps us all really excited and moving forward.
Marvelous. Marvelous. Anyone else want to share what you love about living in your community? I live in a new neighborhood, and one of the things that I love is just the getting to know the new neighbors. Just having those conversations on the sidewalk at the foot of your driveway and building those new connections. It's just really, I really enjoy that. I do. But thank you both for sharing. Thanks everybody for participating in that. And the reason I asked that question about community, of course, we've already been talking about it, build the community to build the capacity. But then also, as we get into today, talking about evidence-based programs and policies and practices, we're really going to be shifting our focus to environmental, because those tend to take a lot of work. When you think about individual strategies, those can be a little bit easier, little more cut and dry. But when it comes to creating community, to shaping your community, to your environment, environmental strategies are the way to go. Let's starts with building the community to build the capacity. And so we're jumping right in. Sometimes people want to select prevention programs or practices that are popular. Maybe it worked well in that community over there. Maybe there's a speaker that's making the rounds that everybody loves. Folks really enjoy it. Or maybe it's one that, hey, I used when I worked over in this community and I just moved over here to this town, or I'm a part of a new coalition. It worked for me back then, so sure, it'll work for me here and now, right? Yeah. Those aren't necessarily the best selection criteria. What's more important is that the program or practice can effectively address the priority substance misuse problem and the associated risk and protective factors, and that it is a good fit for that specific community. Now, prevention researchers and practitioners, they've developed many programs and practices that are capable of producing positive changes for individuals, for families, and communities struggling with substance use related problems. But in order for these to work, these programs and practices must be carefully selected and implemented, and then continually improved time after time over time. It's like we got some more folks coming in from the waiting room. Marvelous. But all right, so definitions. I want you to stretch out your fingers, get that chat box ready. Would love for you to just put in a word or two when you see the word program. What comes to mind? Feel free to drop that in the chat box. How would you define a program? Curriculum. Yeah. I'll give you a few more moments to get those typing fingers going. Often educational, work plan, activity, set criteria for instruction, reoccurring service based on an evidence-supported curriculum. Involves the audience. Something with defined limits and work plan activities to address an issue. Often a goal to improve the community. Yeah, marvelous. Hey, got another one. Addressing the community needs, purposeful, involves instructor and consumer of info. Yeah. So for this session, we're going to run with, so the way I'm going to define it for this is a program. It's a set of predetermined, I think we saw that, structured and coordinated activities. So you all get an A+ right there. But what about a practice or practices? How would you define that? What are we thinking in terms of practices? While you type, I'm going to hydrate. All right. Goals put into action. A little less talk and a lot more action. How you implement the program steps. Standards. Governing principles. The way in which we offer the programs to ensure they are consistent and effective. Yeah. All right. So I like to call it, practices are more of a type of approach or a technique or a strategy. A program can incorporate different practices, and guidance for implementing a specific practice can be developed and distributed as a program. I'll say that one more time. So a practice is a type of approach or a technique or a strategy. Now, a program can incorporate different practices, and guidance for implementing a specific practice can be developed and distributed as a program. We got one more for you. Evidence-based. How would y'all describe or define that? What do you got for me? Knowing a lot of y'all in here, I bet you'll nail this one. Just bullseye. Grounded in research on effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. Supported by research, proven to be effective. Oh, yeah, through systematic research and evaluation. Yes. Yes, program or practice that is proven to be effective based on research. Absolutely. Y'all get it. They've got documented evidence of effectiveness. Rock and roll. All right. Well, that concludes this 2-hour session. All right. I'll see y'all next week. All right. So, what does it mean to really be evidence-based? Y'all get it. Interventions, programs, they've got evidence of effectiveness. They found to be effective under a specific set of circumstances. You've got your team of experts that agree that an intervention, a program, a strategy is evidence-based if it fulfills one of the 3 conditions. It's included in a federal registry of evidence-based interventions. Ding, got that. Okay. It is reported in peer-reviewed journals with positive effects on the primary targeted outcome. Now, the third option, this one is where you're looking for documented effectiveness that must be supported by other sources of information and the consensus judgment of informed experts. And there's some guidelines for that as well, such as the intervention. It's going to be based on theory of change that is documented and has a clear logic or conceptual model. Now, interventions also going to be in similar content and structure to the interventions that appear in those registries or in those peer-reviewed literature. So they're similar to those already reviewed interventions. And then you could also look for the intervention that is supported by documentation that it has been effectively implemented in the past and at multiple times in a manner attentive to scientific standards of evidence with results that show a consistent pattern of credible and positive effects, where the intervention is reviewed and deemed appropriate by a panel of informed prevention experts. That includes well-qualified prevention researchers. To make a long story long, it's not just about them being listed in a national registry. There are other means to find evidence-based programs. And that's sort of what we're looking at there. Because I know when I first started in prevention, I would just go to those registries, well, I don't see something that quite works or quite fits. But there are other layers of evidence. Now, when you are selecting an intervention, it is important to consider whether the evidence of effectiveness is weak or if it's strong. Clearly, you want to give priority to those interventions with that strong evidence of effectiveness. Now, for specific problems, there may be fewer programs that are evidence-based and listed in those federal registries or in those peer-reviewed journals. And I'll actually talk about some of those peer-reviewed journals a little bit later. There might not be very many evidence-based programs that address prescription drug abuse than there are that address underage drinking. There may also be fewer evidence-based programs that have been shown to be effective for certain population groups. So when you look at those registries, those aren't the end-all, be-all when it comes to identifying to finding evidence-based programs. All right, so EBPs, they can be split into, your individual or family or your environmental level strategies. And we just want to do a quick look at the differences between these two. And this is where I'm going to need another water break. So I'd love to have two volunteers. Could I have two volunteers, one person to give voice to the individual and family column, and then one person to give voice to the environmental column, please? And we can always do my Zoom favorite, nose goes. Who would give voice to the individual or family column?
I can do that.
Hey, all right. Thank you, Terry. All right. And who wants to be the voice of the environmental column?
I can do that.
Hey, all right. Thank you, Stacy. All right, Terry, you're up first.
You just want me to go all the way down?
Yes, please.
Okay. Individual family targets, individual skills, knowledge, behavior, aims to change, personal control over misusing substances, strategies, education, peer support, mentoring, small group activities, engages educators, peers, and professionals.
Marvelous. Thank you, Terry. Stacy.
For environmental, it targets the setting, which is surroundings, norms, policies, laws. It aims to change community conditions favorable to misusing substances. Strategies include social marketing campaigns, policy change, enforcement of laws and policies, and it engages coalitions, stakeholders, law enforcement, and policymakers.
All right. Thank you both. Thank you both. Yeah, so those individual strategies, they're going to focus on individual people. The goal of helping them make healthy, responsible, and legal decisions regarding their own behavior. And yeah, they'll use that education, support, and prevention curricula to help folks. And these activities, like you said, are usually delivered by those health educators or prevention professionals working in one-on-one or small groups of individuals. Now, when we're looking at the environmental, those are focusing on the greater community. Talked about community right at the beginning, something you love about living in your community. Now, these are focused on the community with helping communities create healthy and responsible cultures around substances, substance use, substance misuse. So groups of people are coming together, often in a coalition, to change the social, political, and even the economic context within which alcohol and other drugs are used in their community. So individual strategies, they impact individual knowledge, skills, and behaviors. Environmental strategies impact the standards, the structures, and the systems that influence individual healthy behavior. So we're going to focus on the environmental strategies, the evidence-based environmental strategy, because those, goodness gracious, sounds like it takes a lot of work. And I feel often folks will shy away from environmental strategies, feeling as though we can't create that kind of impact, that kind of change in our community. But dagnabbit, you can. You all are prevention leaders, and you can absolutely create positive change in your communities, the culture within your community. I get fired up there, and I'll try not to go down a rant, but oh my goodness, y'all can do it. And I already kind of read over this before. The impact is impacting individual knowledge, skills, and behavior, and environmental is going to be impacting the standards, structures, and systems. We're going for that big picture change. Culture is the strategy, and you can shape, you can shift, you can create positive change in your culture through building the community, through building the capacity of the community. All right, I'm starting to go down a little soapbox there, so I'm going to reel myself in so Steve doesn't have to. All right, so went too far. So the potential is to just do that, reach the entire populations collectively and change the risk or protective factors as well. Some big things coming. Oop, that slide. We just went through that slide. I should have deleted it. All right, environmental strategies. Here we are. Fun fact, by the way, interest in the scientific study of environmental strategies and using them related to alcohol policy, that dates back to the mid 1970s. And in the US, this approach was really embraced in, I want to say it was like the 1980s, by communities looking for for a way to address the growing problem of alcohol outlet related crime and violence, drinking and driving, and underage access to alcohol and other community-based alcohol problems. Back started in the 70s, and US adopted it, embraced it in the 1980s. So before we get rolling into this even more, it's time for another breakout. So as I set these up, I want you to go ahead and be thinking about coming up with a one sentence definition of environmental change strategy that you might use with someone who's not in the prevention field. And an example, when a plant is not thriving, a good gardener adjusts the plant's environment or conditions. More sun, less weeds, the right amount of water. You don't ask the plant to change. So that's what we're going to do. And then, of course, because I love hearing the collective wisdom of the room, we will have a few of you all report back with us as well. So this is going to be a quick one, just a 5-minute breakout. So be thinking about that. A one sentence definition of environmental change strategies that you might use with someone who's not in the prevention field. Questions? All right, let me set the timer. All right, so you're going to get 5 minutes. And I'm excited to hear what y'all come up with. All right, so this may be the moment I have secretly been waiting for as I was building out this session. Let's hear some of those definitions. What did you all come up with? Let's hear from 3 or 4 folks. What did you come up with? Cassidy in the chat box. A strategy that creates an environment where it's easier to make the healthy choice. Yeah, thanks, Cassidy. Now, if anybody, feel free to come off of mute as well. Feel free to come off of mute. Let's hear.
I can jump in, and somebody from our group can jump in as well. We kind of started with the definition, and then we went down kind of a whole different path. We talked about culture. We talked about just kind of alternative activities and what that all looks like. But what I had written down was bringing adaptable change to an identified community to address and raise awareness of unhealthy behaviors.
Seeing some nods around the table, around the room. Yeah. Thank you, Stacy.
I'll go for our group. We kind of came up with and boiled down our thoughts to aiming for change on a macro level to influence community norms and make awareness.
Influencing those community norms. I like it, Kayla. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Sandra, so you're off mute?
Oh, no, nothing.
Oh, all right. You got me there. All right. Wonderful. Yeah. Y'all get it. I dig it. All right. Yes, exactly. One of the other examples that I was holding on to in my back pocket was holding young people solely responsible for underage drinking is like holding fish responsible for becoming sick in a polluted stream. Yeah, that was just another one I had there. Yeah. All right. All right. And I do not personally know that cow pictured on the slides, but I thought it was kind of cool to put in here as well. I got to mix things up a little bit. All right. So now fire back up those chat box fingers. Yeah, as you can tell, it's getting late in the day because I cannot talk anymore. But would love for you to share just in the chat box, what do you think the value is in using environmental strategies in prevention work? And if anybody wants to come off of mute as well, absolutely welcome to. Yeah. Reaching a large amount of people. Wide reach. More bang for your buck.
I think value is of the environment. I mean, the environment, I think, is just the bread and butter of where it all starts. You know, it can make or break somebody.
Yeah. Environments were the bread and butter. Yeah. And I've got Jamie in there saying often it can be community driven. Yes, you get that good buy-in from the community. Yeah. Yeah, well, the value, yeah, is because they focused, just like y'all came up with the community as a whole. And they do, just like we shared earlier, they seek to change the social, cultural, and political ecology of a whole community. Now, environmental strategies do have advantages over individual strategies when it comes to just that. Culture is the strategy. All right. So, yeah, they're more likely to really yield those desirable outcomes with the caveat that the EBP that you selected is appropriate for that focused population and the proper domain, and it's implemented with fidelity to those core components, which we'll get into a lot later in this series. But yes, and hey, EBPs, they've been done before. You've got resources to guide the planning, you've got resources to guide the implementation, and you can likely find a peer, another prevention practitioner that's implemented this before, and you can partner, you can collaborate, you can support each other because prevention is better together. And EBPs, they're desirable because they can help align your program or your initiative with that good, strong public health approach. And lastly, look at that tenet of sustainability. When you're talking about environmental strategies, your program is a lot easier to sell. It's easier to get all of that buy-in from those community partners, community stakeholders, because you're talking about the community, creating change in that community as a whole. Everybody's got a stake in it. Also, with environmental strategies, they can produce a quick win, and those quick wins will help instill that commitment towards that longer term impact on your practices, your policies, and your community norms. But yeah, they do require that substantial commitment from the various community sectors to help contribute to sustainable community change. But hey, you do have the ability to reach the entire population and reduce the collective risk and create lasting change in your community norms, your systems, and produce that widespread behavior change, in turn reducing problems for the entire community. Now, individual strategies, those drug education classes, those are based on the premise that substance abuse develops because of deficits in knowledge about negative consequences, inadequate resistance skills, poor decision-making abilities, and low academic achievement. But these efforts, while important in a multiple strategy approach, do little to independently alter the overall environment in which people live and work. All right, so telling people what to do is different than limiting food options in, say, like a grocery store, or providing exercise breaks for employees. but also simply telling an individual that substance use, misuse is dangerous will not necessarily affect their behavior in a significant manner. You know, folks don't become involved with substances solely on the basis of personal characteristics. They are influenced by a complex set of factors, such as any institutional rules, regulations, community norms, those perceived norms, mass media messages, and the accessibility to alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Now, when a comprehensive, multi-state, multi-partner effort is in place, coalitions can contribute to achieving population level change by focusing on multiple focal points on a sufficient scale and scope to make a difference community wide. I mean, y'all, this is where I was getting fired up earlier, because you can create that positive change on that scale. You absolutely can when you bring people together. Yeah, I get so fired up and just, yeah. All right, dial it back, Dave, dial it back. All right, so blind spots. Blind spots. You know, we need environmental strategies. You know, focusing on only on individual level prevention strategies can present problems. You know, some of those problems, you know, these are blind spots that I've shown here. Assuming the concept of individual actually exists. This assumption, it's going to blind us to the most basic fact that it's incredibly difficult to define individual. Even in thinking about someone's own body, it actually comes from biological parents and all of their preceding ancestors. One's own personality, that's socially formed based on the socio-cultural context in which we grew up. An individual person is not a separate, distinct, isolated entity. We live in communities. We can not abstract people from their social groups, from their institutions and their populations. And then also in the blind spot, the strong effects, oftentimes stronger effects of environmental factors can definitely exert on the health of a population. When focusing exclusively on personal traits or characteristics, we can easily lose sight that built social and cultural environments can and do influence health behaviors. And this is particularly important in thinking about prevention science research. Researchers haven't been very successful at avoiding the blinding effects of individual level theories, and research primarily focuses on individual level interventions, which is also why it's so hard for us to know what environmental strategies are evidence-based, because the researchers are really trying to focus on the individual level. Now, environmental interventions, they start being implemented widely in the absence of data. They could produce undesired outcomes. So when you implement them widely without data, without that evidence base, you could produce unintended, undesirable outcomes. And that could be a whole nother webinar there on lessons learned from policies and environmental efforts. We could also talk about marijuana on that one, but we won't go there today. All right, but that last blind spot, ethical, political blind spots, you know, individual level interventions lay the responsibility for health decisions, behaviors, and lifestyle changes at the doorstep of the person. Now, that can easily lead to blaming the victim mentality when health outcomes are less than optimal. If our interventions are rooted in individual level theory with the promise that health is merely the outcome of personal choices and habits, then it's solely on that person's fault. It's that person's fault for poor health outcomes like substance use. Because if you're just focused on individual, you're laying the premise That is up to that individual completely. It is solely up to them. So just some thoughts about only focusing on individual level strategies. So now some advantages compared to individual prevention, individually focused prevention that, like I said, reduces individual risk. The environmental approaches, they have the ability to reach entire populations, reducing that collective risk. Altering the community systems may produce widespread small changes in behavior among large populations. And this can result in substantial net benefits within the community as well in terms of the reduced problems. Now, prevention targeting the environment also offers the opportunity to produce larger reductions in risk by creating conditions that support the non-use of illicit substances and responsible use of legal ones. Individual level prevention programs often target individuals without considering the environments in which those individuals live. And like I said, no one lives and makes decisions within a bubble. One's environment deeply influences things both in and out of their control, like daily lifestyle choices. Oh, all right. I could just go on and on and on about this, but let's just talk about the enduring effects as well. Environmental prevention approaches have that potential for long-term and short-term effectiveness. If an environmental strategy successfully changes the legal, economic, or even the social contingencies surrounding substance use, it can foster important shifts in attitudes that are less supportive of use. Now, environmental barriers to substance misuse and widespread normative shift, that equals a changed system for current and those future generations with fewer opportunities and inducement to misuse substances. Even if individually focused strategies are effective in creating lasting change in individuals, because they fail to change the fundamental processes supporting use, they must be repeated for each and every new generation as well. Environmental strategies, y'all. I love them. I love them. So here's just an example. So this line that you see here depicts the results of a very important study which looked at data from fatal traffic crashes among young people under the age of 21 in the US from 1984 through 2004. The study looked at how many of these fatal crashes involved alcohol. So the percent of which is shown on the vertical axis. A little bit more background, a little more context here. In the 1970s, some states were experimenting with lowering the legal drinking age to 18, 19, or 20. I don't know which state, so don't ask me that. But I can go back to the resource and find it for you. But because of increased youth traffic crashes, the federal government moved to withhold highway funds from states that didn't have a minimum legal drinking age of 21. By 1988, all states had that 21 minimum legal drinking age in order to receive those highway funds. Now, it's been well established in the literature that the significant decline in alcohol-involved fatal traffic accidents among young people is largely attributed to the 21 minimum legal drinking age. This right here is a great example of the broad and efficient reach of environmental strategies, aka policy here, and its effects have been endured for decades. So another fun picture. That is not the puppy I'll be picking up from doggy daycare later. We have a boxer pup, but didn't want to pull one of those out and put in here. That's just an adorable puppy. But yes, let's talk about when are EBPs most effective. All right, so they're gonna be effective when they're doing just this. They're meeting the needs of the community. You know, that public health approach. Now, this is that conceptual fit, which we'll actually get into in the next session. And you want to keep in mind the social ecological approach, those developmental stages, universal, selective, and indicative prevention. You know, your universal, you're looking at raising an excise tax on tobacco products, or selective, you know, funding temporary housing for people experiencing homelessness, or even the indicated, such as improving school-based access to depression treatment services. You know, you want to meet the needs of the community. Then the 4 R's. And it's hard for me to not make a pirate joke here, but I will hold back. But yes, you want to match the 4 R's of capacity. You want to make sure you've got the resources for your EBP. You want to make sure your community, your stakeholders, your coalition, their level of readiness is that where they are ready for that strategy. You may have some restrictions from your funder, from your community. There might be some restrictions. So you want to make sure you match that. And then also any specific requirements, or here you're looking at the practical fit, resources, readiness, restrictions, and requirements. And again, we'll talk about practical fit in the next session as well. And then that multi-pronged approach. You got to address the problems from multiple angles with aligned and consistent messaging and efforts. Comprehensive approach is where it's at. You want to use environmental strategies in conjunction with those individual strategies. Comprehensive is the way to go. All right. So now, thinking back to those 4 R's of capacity, just want to put you back into breakouts for a little bit. Have a discussion about this. What are some considerations that you would need to take in mind when it comes to implementing compliance checks? Give me just 1 second to set up the breakout rooms. This one, we're going to give you 8 minutes. 8 minutes to have a discussion with your group around the 4 R's as it relates to compliance checks. And it looks like I got to shift a couple folks around. All right. Questions. All right, we are going. All right, welcome back to the main room. So we are all one big community, so let's learn from each other. What were some of those considerations you were keeping in mind? I want to hear from about 4 or 5 folks. What do we got here when it comes to implementing compliance checks? Feel free to use the chat box, and of course, you are always welcome to come off of mute. What were some of the things you talked about in your breakout rooms?
This is Emma. We talked about the sort of the state dependent restrictions surrounding compliance checks. So for example, right now, we're unable to implement compliance checks under the grants that we work under. And also in previous years, Stacy was saying that having implemented compliance checks in the past, the first infraction typically just falls on the individual, not on, for example, the retailer. And so it doesn't really have, like, you know, this is an environmental strategy. Is it having an environmental effect, or is that just like really sort of getting someone fired? And then, because the business, Stacy was saying, won't actually be fined unless the same person like sells alcohol underage, for example, again. So they have to do it twice in order for the actual business to be affected, whereas the individual, and so normally they just fire the person because they don't want it to happen again.
Oh, I would have loved been in that breakout room and a part of that conversation. Yes, I love that the angle you're taking on that is it environmental strategy if it's not creating that kind of impact? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I see Ryan put in the chat box partnerships with other sectors that can help enforce those compliance checks. Yeah. Now, what else? Let's hear a couple more voices. What were some of those other considerations that you shared in your breakouts? I got another in the chat box. Willingness of establishments to comply. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In terms of resources, I'd shared, that it's a staffing issue. Everybody's willing. And when
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of staff, law enforcement staff, it always goes well. And then someone else had shared, requirement wise, a large grant is tied to finishing some of those compliance checks. And so that helps get those done in that situation. So varies from grant to grant.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, Terry, you may have seen me kind of tense up here. I'm having flashbacks to forced overtime as a police officer because prevention folks came to our chief and said, "Hey, you have to do this." We didn't have enough bodies,
Yeah.
so we had to work 12 hours during the day and then stay over for 4-hour overtime patrol for compliance checks.
Oh gosh.
So back to resources and readiness. Definitely want to take into account those R's. All right. Okay, I'm over that. I'm good. I'm back in the zone. Yes. All right. Groovy. Groovy. So yeah, these are all things you might want to keep in mind as you start to identify, as you start to select your EBPs. If I was clicking on the PowerPoint, so now another fun little picture there. I did not make that little race car and race track, but we're gonna keep going down that line on things that you might want to keep in mind. You might want to know before you start selecting those EBPs. And back to those restrictions and requirements. We're getting to those 4 R's as well. You want to match your EBP to those. You also want to know what those are before you select your EBPs, right? You don't want to select one that your funder says, no, you can't do that. There's restrictions as well. So definitely want to keep those in mind. And hey, I wish Chuck D was here because he wants to get this image. He's a spiff fanatic. But also, before you start selecting, you want to go through and answer these questions when you're in the assessment and in your capacity step of working through the strategic prevention framework, or SPIF for short. You want to really identify that substance or behavior problem, and you want to know the population, those risk and protective factors that you're going to prioritize. There's going to be a lot of them that you'll identify, but you want to figure out which ones to prioritize. And then, of course, the setting and duration of delivery that, as you can see there in the parentheses, relate right back to capacity, to your 4 R's of capacity. All good things to keep in mind as you're getting ready to select. Also, logic model. Some folks might have a little tremor, a little shake. I know logic models, though, they can sound daunting, but use the logic model as your roadmap for selecting your strategies. The importance of knowing the risk and protective factors in your community before choosing strategies is going to make such a big difference. You're going to have the largest impact by knowing not just what the issue is, but why it's happening in what ages? Now, if access, say for example, is an issue, what type of access? Are doctors overprescribing? Are young adults sharing prescriptions? If youth already know the risk and you're just doing campaigns around risk, you won't see a change. Change really comes from knowing the whole story. That is why it is so vitally important to start with a logic model. So, using the logic model, it's going to be a roadmap because it's going to allow you to really depict what substance use problem you want to address and why that problem is happening in your community. So, like what risk factors are present and what protective factors are missing. And some folks might refer to these as intervening variables as well, because if you intervene on them, you can affect the problem to related behavior. But then the prevention strategies that you've identified here in your logic model, they're going to be the best use of your resources to really target those intervening variables of why it's happening in your community. So very strategic application of your resources for your community as well. This is your guide. So real quick in the chat, do you all have a logic model using to guide your prevention efforts? Yeah, Emma's got one. Quick on the chat too. All right. All right, you're about to see my Zoom happy dance. I love seeing all the logic model affirmations right there. Fun fact, when I was in Steve's role, I took a 9-foot section of a wall in my apartment. I got that blue painter's tape and a bunch of different size Post-it notes. Took our work plan and made a logic model, 9 foot by, it's probably about 5 foot. I love them. Yes, logic models, they are your roadmap. They are a great communication tool as well for building buy-in, bringing folks on board. That's going to hopefully ultimately lead to sustainability as well. Good stuff. Good stuff. So how do we find these evidence-based practices that are the best fit for our community and our available resources? I gave you a whole bunch of things to keep in mind before selecting them, things you need to know. You've got your logic model ready to go as well. So how do you find evidence-based strategies? Well, here we go. Systematic reviews and individual studies. Easy, right? What the heck does that mean, Dave? Well, many groups with expertise in and commitment to evidence-based prevention, they'll conduct systematic reviews of the effectiveness of available programs and practices. Now, these reviews are excellent sources of information for folks searching for EBPs that may be a good fit for your community. Now, the findings from these systematic reviews, it can be found in searchable online databases and publications from federal agencies and other prevention and public health organizations. There's some national nonprofits. There's some university-based research centers and peer-reviewed journals. And these expertly conducted systematic reviews are going to offer you as prevention practitioners, as prevention leaders, they're going to offer you a valuable snapshot of information across multiple evaluation studies of the EBPs. Now, some folks may not find an option with strong conceptual and even a strong practical fit for their communities in their reviews. But hey, if that happens, you may want to look closely at the findings from the evaluation studies of the individual prevention programs and practices. Now, that information that can be found in those peer-reviewed journals, as well as in reports written by those involved in the implementation and in the evaluation of the programs and practices at the local level. And I mean by that is look at some evaluation reports for funding agencies and that support planning. You'd even look at some doctoral theses or theses. I'll let Steve pronounce that one because I'm getting tongue-tied this late in the day. But yes, there is information out there to where you can get the local level data, evaluation reports from these programs and practices as well. And some of those peer-reviewed journals, you can find them in the NIH, the Eric Institute of Education Sciences, and then Academic One file through your local library. And hey, if you have a university in your community, y'all, their libraries have access to some incredible research articles as well. All comes with being better together. So engage those folks. And some peer-reviewed journals that you can turn to for good write-ups as well would be like the American Journal of Public Health, the Journal of Addiction Studies, the Annual Review of Public Health, Preventative Medicine, the Journal for the American Medical Association, and also Public Health and Research as well. And I can actually copy and paste a link into the chat box as well. That way you don't have to try to write all those down. So here are a nice healthy list of journals that are worth looking into to help find your EBPs. All right, switch my windows back here. Some other go-to resources. Got the SAMHSA, of course, the Evidence-Based Practices Resource Center. You've got the NI College AIM, CDC, the Department of Justice, Wyoming Prevention Depot. Shout out Wyoming. Saw y'all here in the room with us earlier. And what are some others that you may go to? I know we've got some serious prevention wisdom in the room here. What do you have? Where are your go-tos when it comes to finding EBPs? What do y'all do in Nebraska? I feel like you guys were working on a matrix of EBPs, some guidelines. What's that look like? Go ahead, Kelly.
I mean, I'm totally new to this position, but I found like our University of Nebraska-Lincoln, they do have some EBP based stuff that I have found very vital. And I have kids, so I know that they do send out surveys to our local school here in town too. So we utilize that a lot.
All right, local university. I like it. I like it. And I see Taylor put in the chat box the Athena Forum. What are some others? What are some others? CADCA. Iowa. Hey, that's what I thought. Yes. Iowa Department of Public Health has got an integrated provider network grantees with a detailed EBP guide. Yes, I thought so. And maybe I was mixed up with Nebraska. I thought Nebraska was working on something similar. I remember y'all sharing notes back in the day. What you got for us, Terry?
Yeah, we do have an EBP matrix that we worked on together. But oftentimes the most helpful thing is just in our PAC meetings, people will share their experiences because oftentimes there's similarities in either coalitions or communities. And so that's helpful to know, either be able to ask questions like, how did this work? Or what were your barriers? I really appreciate being able to ask a person that I know, what did you struggle with? Or, what were your what would I need to know implementation wise for this EBP? I really appreciate that from other regions across Nebraska.
Oh, yes. Y'all are going to laugh at me and get tired of it, but I love that community approach to it. helping each other. The more we come together as prevention professionals, the bigger impact, the bigger change we can make in our communities. Speaking of old Steve and the Mid-America PTTC, see, I still have to practice saying it, do have their communities of practice that are still going on healthy. And it's a chance for you to connect with folks from across the Mid-America region and do just what Terry was sharing. Share what's working, what are some of the barriers, what are some of the challenges around prevention efforts, around EBPs as well, and even sharing some notes on that. Steve, you want to do a shout out for those? When's the next one coming up? Putting you on the spot.
The next one actually is one of the Deck Connects. So that's a community of practice, and we'll have that on the 24th. I dropped a link in earlier, but I'll put it back in the chat as well. And it's just a great way to talk about the Deck network nationwide, but it's we bring together the 4-state region to ask specific questions from Stacy and Eric, who will join us on the call.
Yeah, it's really coming together to talk about the needs, addressing the needs and supporting drug endangered children across the country. Important stuff. Yeah, prevention is better together. All right. Another resource to highlight would be SAMHSA's Selecting Best Fit Programs and Practices. And that is available on SAMHSA's website in the SAMHSA EBP Resource Center as well. There's also another good resource when it comes to EBPs that I hope you all will go visit sometime in the near future, and that would be the PTTC's evidence-based resource list. There are PDF resources, toolkits, downloadable webinar slides, handouts, recorded webinars. Everything that's been done through the entire PTTC network as it relates to evidence-based resources is all right there at your fingertips as well. There is the link. You can also just go to pttcnetwork.org and you'll see under resources right in the middle of your screen. Yeah. All right. Marvelous. And we can put more links in the chat box as well. So, want to just spend the last few minutes reflecting on this session. But before we get into it, got to do some plugs. Next session for this EBP series, we're going to dig into what must happen for intervention success. What happens after searching for your EBPs, and what are the best options for your community as it relates to EBPs. So that's what we're doing next week. And during this last little conversation, Steve, you want to drop the link for that in the chat box? So if folks have not registered, they can do that. All right. So if you've attended a Zoom with me in the past, you know I love to hear everybody. I love to have conversations because conversations are where it's at. Conversation can help expand our knowledge, expand our perspectives, learn from each other, and then also foster and create more connection, thus building that sense of community. But then also when it comes to learning and processing new information as well, it's good to have a conversation at the end of a training, at the end of a workshop, at the end of a conference, and just look back. Because we're all going to be picking up, we're all going to be taking away different things. And as we share those, we then reinforce that learning for each other as well. So why not just wrap up today with a closing conversation? And I know we're getting down to about 30 folks. So I would love for this first question, I want everybody fire up those chat box questions. This first one, I want you all to respond in the chat box. The very first question: what words, images, or activities are standing out from you today? What words, images, or activities are standing out to you from today? Let's see that chat waterfall. Yeah, stretch out those fingers. Just what words, images, or activities? Give you a few moments to type. Environmental strategies are very important. Mhm. Mhm. Community. Mhm. Evaluation. Mhm. Taylor, aren't you an evaluator?
Nope, I'm
Yeah.
not.
Okay, okay. Hey, here comes that waterfall. Awesome. Let me scroll up here. Validation of our selection of environmental strategies together with individual strategies. Yeah, it was cool to get insight about how things are done in different states. Thinking about the 4 R's when considering EBPs. Mhm. Compliance checks, environmental strategies. Logic model is very important. The picture of the cow is sticking in my head when talking about environmental strategies. I should have named that cow. I also should have had a little tally to see who could keep up with how many different animals I had on the slides today. A fish can't thrive in polluted water. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Keep those coming in if you haven't entered yours. Now, this next question, feel free to come off of mute and share your voice to close out this conversation. I'm just curious, what do you appreciate about EBPs?
I guess the first thing that sticks to my mind when thinking about EVPs is having a foundation to stand on, to back up what we're saying.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. Few others. Few others. Yeah, the research. They have an evidence base you can share with partners and stakeholders. Yeah, and we got basically what Kelly said. Nothing succeeds like success. Oh goodness, you should be a podcaster with that. Yeah, yeah. Where where might you have some lingering uncertainty? Feel free to come off of mute and share your voice as well. Always welcome in my Zoom to share your voice.
I would say I have some lingering uncertainty about sort of the effectiveness of environmental strategies, at least after using compliance checks as an example, at
Mhm.
least how they're written in Iowa. And I think part of that too is that, we have a relatively new team, but
Mhm.
what we have consistently been told is that prevention has really shifted from sort of over the past 10 years from going to, like doing more work in schools or upstream prevention to trying to implement environmental strategies. And I think it seems like maybe a difficult prospect for some of us to be able to implement policies, for example, that would have that sort of community level change. And so I don't know if you have any sort of like words of advice or any success stories maybe from the Midwest about certain environmental strategies that were implemented in some of our surrounding states or that really have been, effective, and any pointers or suggestions, I guess. That's sort of just what I'm mulling over right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say let's write that down, Steve, for the next community of practice and pull the wisdom from the region. Anybody want to share an example right off the cuff as well? Yeah, anybody have a good EBP from our Mid-America region that you've had success with?
This is Zach. I would say we've had some success doing tobacco compliance checks. We've been tracking the data for the last 20 years, and we've seen it fall below 8%. So that's been pretty effective for us, and it's been done across the United States, really, and every state's really sort of seen a similar kind of trend in terms of selling tobacco to underage youth.
Yeah. Zach. Oh, did you have something, Emma? Sorry, you come off mute.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks to Zach for that
yeah.
example.
Yeah. All right. We'll hold on to that. That is the essence of the communities of practice, is to share what's worked, what isn't working across the region as well. Any others though when it comes to some lingering uncertainty? Oh, I got a message. How to review the literature and determine when a strategy is evidence-based enough, i.e., what evidence is sufficient. Well, I hope to see you at our next 2 sessions. I think you'll find some good info there. Yeah. Where are some opportunities for you to use EBPs? Just opportunities, just some ideas, some thoughts, little brainstorming. Opportunities. What are y'all thinking about?
Maybe I'm way off base, but I'm thinking like where it would come into effect with me is with like ordinances and stuff like that on what I want to implement on how the ordinances are listed.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. A couple others. What opportunities? What ideas do you have where you can use some EBPs?
This is Emma again. I was sort of thinking about, because I am in Iowa, and so we do have an evidence-based programs, practices, policies guide that we need to work from according to sort of a lot of our grant stipulations, and thinking about sort of being from Rhode Island and how the policies around alcohol are very different there. Like I was shocked when I walked in, for example, to a gas station and saw liquor being sold in the Midwest. And not that I hadn't lived in places like that before, but I think maybe one of the things that I'm mulling around in my head is one way to build capacity in order to be able to implement some of these bigger environmental strategies would be to look back at the research of when these laws were changed in somewhere like Rhode Island and see like what statistics do they have from, pre making this policy change to post making this policy change, and over what length of time, and what sort of statistics can we show from different areas to why this would be a beneficial change to make in our local environments.
Yeah, I like it, Emma. Yes. I look at doing your research, digging into the numbers. Yeah, and then we've got in the chat box from Kelly, forming new coalitions. Absolutely. What significance might they have on the work that you do or the communities that you serve? What significance might they have on the work that you do or the communities that you serve?
Well, I would say sorry, it's Emma again. We're, attempting to prevent someone from reaching a stage of substance use where it becomes like a diagnosable disorder, right? So making low risk choices when it comes to alcohol use, or informing the general public about sort of like debunking some myths around whether or not marijuana use would be a high risk or a low risk choice. And yeah, essentially just like improving the decision making capacities, I would say, more so on the prevention side of people to make healthy choices.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Emma. Let's hear a couple other folks. What significance might EVPs have on your communities or on the work that you do? All right, I have one last question for you all. This last one, you can use the chat box if you want to, but what newspaper headline or tweet describes a key insight or takeaway from today? And I'll put that in the chat box as well for you. Just use a little that creative brain. See what you can come up with. What newspaper headline or tweet, 150 characters or less, describes a key insight or takeaway from today? Drop those in the chat box when you have one. I mean, you already know what mine's going to be. Prevention is better together. I had to say it first, Steve. I had to beat you to it so you couldn't. If you wanted to, I suppose you could throw up a hashtag as well. But yeah, what you got? Newspaper headline or tweet that describes a key insight or takeaway from today. Pushing those brains to think creative in the late afternoon. Healthy people, healthy communities. Yeah. I like it, Kelly. I like it. You are the first one, so you win a prize. That prize is going to be a PDF copy of these slides. Congratulations. Yeah. What are some others? What are some of those other key learnings? Key insights? Just a little tweet or a headline. We got Steve's from earlier. Build the community to build the capacity. That was on your first little intro slide, sir. I remember that one. Yeah. Any others? Yeah. Making the healthy choice the default choice, right? Making that the norm, right? Yeah. Culture counts. Yeah. Extra. Hey, extra. Read all about it. EBP shown to be effective in changing substance misuse. Hey, where do I sign up or subscribe to read that one? Yeah, culture counts. I like it. Making the healthy choice the default choice. All right. Well, y'all, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you in this virtual community that we've got here. We've got another session next week. Like I said, we're jumping into what's got to happen for intervention success, what happens after searching for those EBPs, and the best options for your community, how to identify which ones are the right ones. Is the evidence enough as well? Steve's probably got a good old link for you all, or you can use your phones to scan that QR code. Y'all, I'm committed, and I know Steve and the PTTC crew, we're all committed to learning, growing, and continuously improving. So we would love your feedback. This post-event survey, it's short, takes maybe 3 minutes, and it's 100% anonymous. So please, would greatly appreciate your feedback, and also looking forward to seeing you all next week to continue this conversation and build and strengthen this community around evidence-based prevention programs.